by the way, Huntsville is cool. We had a lovely walk to past the art museum into downtown. There was a market going on yesterday afternoon at the Church of the Nativity, a beautiful old Episcopal church, so we've had a really delightful time. And then we spent the evening in conversation with Lee Padgett, so it doesn't get much better than that. I also want to thank, I did some thank yous yesterday. I also want to thank the conference for purchasing one of my books, Models of Evangelism, and one of Jack's books, 7 Secrets of the Spirit-Filled Life, for each church, which is wonderful. We've never had a group do that before. Thank you, Bishop. So we're going to be over there at noon today, signing your book for your church if you'd like that. Otherwise, you can just take the book. I did want to say that for those of you who might want to read it in Spanish, it's been translated into Spanish, and I do have 3 copies for purchase. Also, there is a QR code if you would like a book for yourself, 40% off and free shipping from the publisher. So, but we'll see you over there at noon today. So we are continuing on our testimony journey. Yesterday it was a path, because this is a path I hope we can all start on and move into. And today we chose Jeremy's photograph of fruits, hoping that this time, talking about testimony, will be fruitful in your own life, but also in the life of your church or wherever you are in ministry. So I mentioned yesterday that one of the books that I have really appreciated as I've been doing more writing in evangelism is by Kevin Harney, Organic Outreach. And I really like this quote, and I wanted to set up what we're going to do this morning. And that is that Christians don't have just one testimony, we have many. Our testimonies are stories of God's power and presence in our lives. Every day brings fresh stories of God's goodness and grace. And I want to start there because I know the word testimony often evokes, first of all, I've had a lot of people tell me, not you all, that's what the Baptists do. Maybe this can be what the Methodists do. But I think sometimes testimony gets stuck in a rut that it's only that moment or that occasion when we decided to follow Christ, right? And it often has a very tumultuous arc to it. Well, if you're like me, I was baptized into the United Methodist Church. In my area, I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I was during the baby boom, and so they were, our actual church, my home church, Armstrong Chapel, United Methodist Church, was built in the early 1800s, and the old chapel still stands, and their service is still being held there, which is cool, and my parents are buried in the graveyard, which has graves back to the Revolutionary War, and it's really cool. But I was born in 58, so in the 50s, they built the big sanctuary. So I was actually baptized in the gymnasium of the high school because the church wasn't built yet. But anyway, if you're like me, maybe there wasn't a decisive moment when you realized that you were following God with all your heart. So all I want to say is that testimony, in fact, one of the things I would encourage you to do is whenever you have your prayer time, morning, noon, night, whatever, if you were Susanna Wesley, you would have had them all 3, right? Despite raising how many umpteen children and all of that, is maybe end your prayer time with what might be your testimony for today. Because what I want us to get into the habit of is that we all have a story of God's power and presence in our life. And it doesn't have to be just stuck in that past, whenever that was. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. So that's where I want to start this morning. Okay, so we're going to look a little bit in John's gospel this morning, because that word, that Greek word, martureo, which Jack told you yesterday, is the Greek word for testimony, is alive and well in the Gospel of John. 43% of the times in the New Testament that martureo occurs is in John's Gospel. And the verb can be translated to bear or be a witness, to give testimony, to testify, to give a good report. Cool, right? I see you shaking your head. Yeah, so as a teacher, I think of a report as a report card. But to give a good report is what we're talking about in these sessions. So the first person we're going to look at is John the Baptist. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light. Would that would be said about us. It's not about me. It's about testifying. It's about pointing the way to the light. Don't look at me. Look at where I'm pointing you, to Jesus Christ, the Son of God. So John serves as the forerunner of the Messiah and takes on himself the prophet's words, "I am the voice of one crying out in the wilderness, make straight the way of the Lord," as the prophet Isaiah said. Another gospel writer sets out John's work as making ready a people prepared for the Lord. And this is all what he's doing through his work as one who testifies, who points the way to Jesus as the light. And yet, despite this significant task that he's undertaken, as we saw earlier, his words are replete with humility. He describes himself as one who is lower than Jesus' slave, unworthy to untie his sandal straps. And so he understands his work as one who bears this message on behalf of the one he's pointing to. And so he came as a witness to testify to the light so that all might believe through him. Eugene Peterson, we use the message a lot. Some of our colleagues at Perkins don't like that translation and give Jack a hard time, but not only do we think it's a good translation, but we got to know Eugene before he died, and we use his translation a lot. But he says, "There once was a man whose name John, sent by God to point out the way to the life light. He came to show everyone where to look, who to believe in." So that's how the Gospel of John starts, is with this portrait of an amazing testifier to Jesus. Okay, now let's move on just a couple chapters later to a very unexpected testifier to Jesus. So John the Baptist, cousin of Jesus, raised up even in Elizabeth's womb, something very powerful was about this particular person. Now, we look at a very different person now, 3 chapters later in the chapter in John, the Samaritan woman. And as most of you know, this is the longest conversation that Jesus has with anyone in the Gospels. And we could spin this out all morning thinking about the ramifications of this. But it also helps us to see that we don't have to be perfect in this. We don't have to have our life fully together. What this is about is pointing the way, again, not to ourselves. If the Samaritan woman is going to point to herself, what a witness would that be? But no, she points the way to Jesus. So Jesus, as you know this story, came to the Samaritan city called Sychar, near the plot of the ground that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. And there's a well there where he is at noon. A Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria? Jews do not share things in common." Now, this is a very unlikely, even unseemly encounter with a woman whose sexual promiscuity, 5 husbands, and one she's currently living with, not a husband. That's a lot. I mean, I've had a hard time just, like with one, much less 5, right? And so her lifestyle is legendary. And yet Jesus engages her and has this deep, deep theological conversation with her that scholars are still trying to unpack centuries later. And immediately, though, what I love about her is that she's not really cowed, is she? She immediately asks a question of him to learn more about this Jewish man who's having a conversation with her, a Samaritan woman, because these are not people who get along well. Jesus answers this question and several others she raises, and the conversation deepens, touching on topics from her own personal life to divisive religious issues. And so when the disciples return, they're astonished. They recognize that this is some kind of moment. They return. The woman leaves her water jar at the well and rushes back to the town with this testimony on her lips. Come and see. Now, we've seen that already, not this morning, but we've seen that already in John chapter 1, where people keep saying, come and see, which I think is a great thing to say to people. Come and see. If you want to know more, come and see. Come and see a man who told me everything I've ever done. They can't be the Messiah. He can't be the Messiah, can he? They left the city and were on their way to him. And so in a very different way, she, like John the Baptist, also readies a people prepared to see the Lord. Very different, in a very different way, but she too readies the people to see the Lord. Now, her testimony, her martyrion, which remember Jack said yesterday can be costly, and I wonder what it cost her as this woman who's been so excluded from town that she goes to the well at the heat of the day to draw water, not when other women, fellow comrades, are there with her so they can talk about their husbands or whatever. But she goes, heat of the day, and imagine then going back to this community who has most likely ostracized her, certainly maybe for her, she's prompted this, but still what it would have cost her to go back and say this very simple testimony, 7 words. I fudged this a bit. You'll see why. He told me everything I've ever done. 7 words that changed her life and the life of her community. But think of what that cost her. And yet she ran back with such enthusiasm, such a testimony on her lips, that we know that her testimony awakened her town, who amazingly believed her enough to get up and find out for themselves. She pointed the way to Jesus, simply, powerfully, profoundly, and people responded. In 7 simple words, she summed up her experience of Jesus with enough wonder and enthusiasm that the townspeople headed out to find out for themselves. That is the nub of what we're going to be talking about, what you're going to actually be talking about this morning. Because this, to me, despite her dubious reputation, she testifies in such a powerful way. So, what I've developed out of this, and yes, you are going to participate because I'm in charge. No, let me just say that I came up with this exercise. Some of you have probably seen this before. It's not, very little of what I do is original. I just borrow well, and then I footnote it well so that I'm not plagiarizing. But some of you may have seen, it's attributed to Ernest Hemingway. It's called the 6-word exercise. The lore, the story goes that when he was stuck in one of his many stories, he sat down and in 6 words set the arc of what he was going to be writing. And that's now become a writing prompt. And so I am borrowing this generously and freely and liberally. But I'm finding that this really helps people get unstuck with, I don't know what to say, or I don't have a testimony. And so our cohort churches are using this a lot. So I want to give you some examples just to warm this up, because as you can see, I'm about ready to ask you to do this, all right? Yours will be anonymous, by the way. Okay, and these are as well. So these are some of the 7-word testimonies that have been done in some of the settings that I teach in. Childlike trust fostered grace for a lifetime. And the thing is, you don't know the backstory, but particularly for some of these, you would want to find more, right? So the whole point is to just kind of entice, and then as people want to hear more, then you can expand. Big God, quiet me, a life together. By the way, when you do this, use punctuation marks to your advantage, right? So you can, because you only have 7 words, and it's hard for me as a writer to put it in 7 words, but you can use contractions, as I showed you with Samaritan woman, punctuation. Okay, another one. Peace in a time of total confusion. Fear, faith, grateful, blessed, share the story. Missing out no more, fully fulfilled. To-dos obsessed. I'm sure that doesn't, apply to any of you. To-dos obsessed, God wows me with creation. And this next one, I do happen to know, this was this woman's calling to seminary. A sidewalk of feathers walking to class. Isn't that lovely? But doesn't that make you want to know more, right? You would want to take her out for coffee or have her take you out for coffee and learn more about what this sidewalk of feathers was all about. Okay, so are you ready? Yes? Yes, we are ready. North Alabama, we are ready. We are going to become people who testify and point others to the light. So, what I am going to ask you to do, and my understanding is there's going to be a Mentimeter platform. Is that correct? Okay, well, what you're going to do, and I'm hoping that someone will give you directions on how this will happen. What I'm going to ask you to do is to write a testimony in 7 words. I want you to channel the Samaritan woman and how courageous and costly it was for her to testify. What I'd like you to do is to write a testimony in 7 words about a time when God was present in your life. And I've already said it could be something that happened yesterday, this morning, last week, a year ago, 5 years ago. Think about a time when God was present in your life and write a storyline about it in 7 words. And if there is an aha moment, maybe like the feathers walking to class or something like that, include that in. Now, gosh, I can't read that. Right, okay. So do you see that? If you could, now I know for some of you, if you're like me, you might just want to write it down on a piece of paper. And I'm very happy to come around and collect them and add them to this list. But if you can do this technically, and I've seen a lot of you with your phones out, believe me. I know those phones are right there, right? If not in your hand, they're on your seat or maybe in your pocket or under your seat. So just, you're allowed to grab them and put them out. You join at Menti, MENT.com, and you use the code, can you see that? 4853-9637. Okay, 4853-9637. And some of you who are technically cool are already getting it on there. So I'm going to let these populate for a minute. We are going to have we're going to take some time with this. So if you haven't done yours yet, please just keep your eyes on your phone, whatever, and we're going to have some music playing. And if anyone wants me to pick up their piece of paper, I will walk around. Anyone have a testimony they want to hand me? the way, I'm glad there are still people like me. I would invite you, actually maybe some real, would you keep playing? Actually, I know I said no, but just, what I'd like you to do is, have you seen these? You've been reading these? What? Okay. Okay, so let's scroll if there's some more. And let your alone in despair fellowship brought life anew, broke chains for freedom in daily living, laid down for rest, renewed, rose again. God broke through my depression and darkness. Crippled by anxiety, Jesus sat beside me. These are amazing. Twists and turns, God saw it through. God dropped Roger on my doorstep. Someone else said the same. I was lost, now I'm found. A father's love that I never had. Two traditions and God's love braided together. Don't you want to know what some of these are, these backstories? God called at 3, I answered phone. 3 in the morning. Amid despair, I received hope and love. Awed by grace, changed every day. God's grace in my wife's voice/eyes. Whoever did that, you're good. You got the words there. Forest bathing, Holy Spirit brought to knees. Working at hotel, read Psalm 102, melted. Don't you want to know what that's all about? No worries until animals pair up 2 by 2. Okay. All right, let me read some of these. Okay, I give up on that. But what a cool way to reach like our kids' generation, younger, with the testimony in a different venue, right? Without words. Okay, let me read some of these that we got on the paper. You're welcome to keep looking or close your eyes to let these wash over you. He spoke loudly through a quiet angel. God called me to preach in dream. Stepping off a cliff but won't fall. When my strength failed, God rescued me. Facing death, God came to see me. Jesus' joy is my hope and strength. Never knew anything else, God ever near. Fear overtaken, prayers lifted, promises made, prayers answered. Now that's more than 7, but it's good. Saved, being saved, will be saved. Brought from lonely solitude into lovely community. God correcting, blinded by the light, amen, exclamation point. Unlock my mind and set me free, 2 exclamation points. Watching for God working in me daily. He came to me in the dark, exclamation point. And finally, because of Jesus, real love, genuine joy, exclamation point. I find this so moving because you all have story after story after story of God's presence and activity in your life. These need to be shared. And let me give you, thank you so much. I don't know your name, but thank you so much. You're playing, I was a pianist in my first life. And then God called me into ministry. Maybe I wasn't that good a pianist after all. And thank you for the Mentimeter. Is there any way to save these, if that's possible? I think it'd be lovely. And Bishop, I will give you these as well. Okay, now, continuing on could we have the PowerPoint back on, please? By the way, thank you for participating in this, and I highly recommend it to you. It works so well. I've never done it in so large a crowd, but thanks to technology, it worked fine. Okay, I want to give you, I do a lot of reading as an academic, and one of the people that I've really enjoyed, I'm trying to give you resources that I think are helpful, is a retired professor of communication at Calvin College in Grand Rapids, Michigan. He's written a lot on the history of religious, like televangelism and things like that. And he wrote a book called, and I'll have it to you at the end, I think it's, well, I'd have to scroll through this all. You'll get the title at the end. But he has down characteristics of a well-told testimony, and I've found these really helpful as people think about, well, what is a testimony, what's it look like? Or how do I frame one? Well, you've already seen one way to frame it in terms of 7 words. But I think it's important to keep these characteristics in mind, because sometimes testimony has actually gone sour, right? And so that sometimes, scares us from doing testimony or evangelism or any kind of faith sharing. So I think these characteristics help us keep things balanced. And the first one that is important when you're thinking about testimony is to be honest. There's no need to make yourself sound any better or actually any worse just to get people's attention. That's where sometimes we get charged with being hypocritical, right? Our kids who are 27 and 31 really struggled in their mid-20s after they left home, because they saw Christians saying one thing and doing another, or being boastful or whatever. And just be honest in your story and tell it like it really happened. A second one that's so important, we've talked about it with John the Baptist, is to be humble, to do it with humility. This is about God. Remember, John's pointing the way to the life light. The Samaritan woman is pointing the way to Jesus. And this is not about you. It is about God's power and presence in your life. Secondly, this is one of the reasons I do the 7 words, is keep it brief. Think about a 30-second, elevator speech. We're going to be doing some exercises with that this afternoon. Test the waters. Try out these 7 words with someone, and if they want to hear more, they'll let you know, right? But be brief and to the point. This next one reminds me of the Samaritan woman. The wonder with which she shared her testimony with the townspeople must have been so great that they responded. And I know for some of us who have been in I was going to say in this business, in this faith for a long time, that maybe sometimes the wonder begins to slip a little. But that is so important to communicate, that you are still amazed, delighted, awestruck about what God is doing in your life. Probably don't need to say this, but speak as a compassionate friend with love. Jack was saying to someone yesterday, one of the things some of you have been asking us what it's like to live in the dorm. That could be a whole nother teaching. But one of the things that we've learned is that they don't do well with judgment. They just really don't. And what they want is, because we don't grade them, we're not their parents, though some of them ask me because I know how to sew things. One of our RAs last year just kept coming to me with, he had a hole in his sweater, or he wore a Spider-Man costume for Halloween and he ran through the fingers. So, but what they want from us is just love. And that love that we show through a lot of food, a lot of listening, a lot of let's go to coffee, a lot of lunches, a lot of meals, that love is what, and I'm going to be so bold to say, I think there is revival happening at Bose Commons on the campus of SMU, not because of us. Sorry, I could tear up right now. But because we're pointing the way to the life light. And we're loving on them, you know, and we can do that. That's why we signed up for this. We're not their pastor. As I said, we're not their parent. We're not their professor. But we are an adult presence in their life who can love on them. And love goes such a long way. And I will say that love, considering all of the conflict, the Southern Baptists just, you know, throwing out churches because they have women pastors, on and on, that's a portrait of the church that the world is getting right now. Our daughter, 31, we've never met the young man. He self-identifies as an atheist. You can imagine that's a little hard for us. But a lot of it is because what he's seen in the news, and she keeps saying to him, but that's not what I believe, that's not who I am, that's not what I believe. And I think a lot of that negativity is really hurting the church. So as you talk with people about Jesus, just love, do it with love. And lastly, this is also so important, is to respect them, that they may not want to hear anymore. They may not want to answer your question, and that's okay. Keep praying. Keep being present. Keep up the fellowship, the friendship, the community, because I believe there will be a time, and we are good Methodists. You know, Wesley's believed, and this is sorry, that sounds a little Southern, believed. Maybe I should just start preaching about Jesus, right? Wesley, we believe in prevenient grace, and what's that all about? But that is that God goes before. This is not us. God goes before to prepare the way for this conversation. And so trust in this good God that prepared the way for the Samaritan woman to return to the townspeople. And if we really take that seriously as United Methodists, we have no reason to fear or be embarrassed. We go as gentle, winsome testifiers to point the way to the life light. And that is what you do when you leave this place. I know it's a hard time, and Jack, that's why we wanted him to preach yesterday, because I think he just got that encapsulated in Elijah's life. But this is not the time to stand in the cave. Go out as testifiers to Jesus. Okay, I'm almost done. Yay, finally, she's almost done. But I do want to say a word about testimony during corporate worship. So we've been talking and focusing on things you can do as an individual, things you can do outside the church, which is so critical. But I want to encourage you, and this is for pastors and laity alike, to think about some I'm always gentle, right? So I married this Italian New Yorker, and I'm always more cautious, you know. But I think gentleness is good. Right, Jack? It's overrated. He thinks it's overrated. This has been our balance for almost 41 years. But I think it's good to leave here with some small steps. And what I want to encourage you is, if testimony is not something that happens ever or maybe only sporadically in your corporate worship, I want to share with you what I'm seeing going on around the country. And let me just say that testimony is going on in some very interesting places all over the country, in churches that are very progressive theologically and socially, that I wouldn't have expected it, because again, testimony, that's what the Baptists do. And so I've kind of compiled some ideas that I just want to mention to you, and you can take them home, live with them, see if anything you think might work. And one of them is to set up a testimony time. Now, there is a church, it's a church plant about 10 years ago in Chicago, Urban Village. It now has 5 campuses. They are a reconciling congregation, and proudly so. Every Sunday, they do 2 things for sure. They celebrate communion, and they have a testimony time. And what that has done for that community is to give people who are often marginalized from the church a place to share their story, how God has found them and rescued them and brought them into community with others. I can tell you more about that if you're interested. This is a bold step. If you don't want to do it weekly, what about like the 5th Sunday of the month? Something like that. Another way to do it is for those of you who preach, is to put a testimony of when God's grace showed up in your life in your sermon. If you're not doing that already, and call it a testimony, and see what happens. Another time is prayer requests. And again, I don't know your liturgy. I don't know how you do these things. All of these won't work for you. But for those of you who do have a time when people stand up, I know that's scary because what if they go on too long and I see people shaking their heads? We can deal with that. You might, 7 words, prayer request. Another one is in announcements. I hate announcements personally, but it is an occasion where someone could testify to what the United Methodist Women's Banquet meant to them, or what a weekend retreat meant to them, or what their Sunday school class, how important that is. There is a way to build that into a brief testimony. Okay, so I'm a musician. Think of all the great hymns and the stories that are behind them, or a time when a hymn touched you in such a way that you were moved by God. Again, brief, but it opens up those times for story. Okay, this one really boggles my mind because we're in a church where it's just stand up, people are joining the church, yay, we receive you in fellowship, we're done. Oh my goodness, what a lost opportunity. Why are you joining the church? What has God done in your life? Why this church? And again, 2 sentences, but it is a time for testimony. Great book on testimony by Lillian Daniel, Tell It Like It Is. It's one of the few books written on the practice of testimony. She's a United Church of Christ pastor, was serving a church in New Haven, Connecticut, in the background of Yale Divinity School. So again, not the Southern Bible Belt, right? And she really felt led to start testimony in her congregation. And so you know when she did it? During Lent. Because she said, you can experiment during a special season because people know that there's only 6 weeks. That's when we started our lattes in Lent. We started lattes in Lent because students knew when it was starting and when it was ending. And she experimented. And people liked it so much that they kept it up. It's a great book, Tell It Like It Is. She's very honest about what worked, what didn't. But one way to think about it is to dedicate a special season for testimony. Another one that I have found incredibly moving in our church is stewardship moments. And again, if you encourage people not to talk about them, but to talk about how their giving, their resources points the way to the life light, that can also be a time for testimony. I do want to say that one of the things that Lillian Daniel has impressed upon me through reading this book is that if you decide to incorporate testimony in your church service at some point, try to do it before the youth and children leave if that's part of your practice. Because what she said is so moving that, first of all, it's a time of catechesis. It's an intergenerational time of catechesis where youth and children see adults talking about their faith, not just always the pastor. It also you might, if you're on the edge, think about having a youth or a child give a testimony. Oh my goodness. But also, she said, what was so interesting is that when the testimony time came, the kids put down their coloring books or whatever, and they were fascinated because they saw someone they knew, a friend, a family friend, or an adult, whoever, giving their testimony. And she said they were riveted on this person and what he or she had to say. So testimony how is, I hope you've come away with some ideas, but as Jack said yesterday, it's kind of your will. And will you consider having this as a part of your regular life as a Christian and of your regular life as Christians gathered together in worship? So that's what I have for you today, this morning. This afternoon, Jack is going to do some cool stuff on testimony where. It's an incredible teaching, and I hope you'll be here. Debbie, do you want me to do anything else, or are we done?
This was great. So express your appreciation again, if you will, to Priscilla.
And thank you so much for participating in this testimony exercise. I appreciate it.
Oh, those were great testimonies.
Yeah, but
so
I get to copy these, and then I'll give them to you.
Okay, that'll be great. I appreciate it.
Thanks.